Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our APUSH series. Today, we're going to be going into our APUSH Period 3 review. So, without further ado, let's get straight into it. All right, so let's start with everything having to do with the French and Indian War. So, basically, the French and Indian War breaks out. We don't really have to get into why that happened, but it did. And there was fighting in the Americas between the French and the British. And there was hiring. They both hired native tribes, which is why the French and Indian War. Whatever. Point is, during the war, um, the colonists helped fight. And one of the things that arose was something called the Albany Plan of Union. Now, this was made by Benjamin Franklin, and essentially, this was to get the colonies to unite in order to fight off the threat of the French. However, it didn't work because it required the colonies to donate taxes and troops, and they weren't willing to do that. So it didn't work. But this is important for two reasons. One, this is where we get the whole join or die thing from, with that picture of the snake. That whole idea. That poster has nothing to do with the Revolutionary War. That actually has to do with the Albany Plan of Union. And second, this helped bring. This was the first attempt at bringing together the colonies, and it also laid the framework for the future constitutional conventions on that and all that. Now, both sides, both the British and the Americans, even though they obviously fought together, they ended up coming out of the war with opposing views of each other. So basically, to sum it up, the British POV was Americans. No one likes them. These guys aren't cool. That's supposed to be a thumbs down, by the way. And the American POV was the British. That's not cool. No one likes these guys, right? But essentially, this is important because they both came out of the war not liking how the other ran things, essentially. And also, this is very important to mention, the Americans came out with this sense of almost entitlement to the new land that was gained during the war because they helped fight for it, and therefore they should get a piece of the land, and they should be able to move out west and take that and settle on that land. That's going to be very important as to what we're about to talk about. Okay, so now, as I was just talking about, the Americans had this new sense of entitlement to this land, right? So they tried to move into it. However, there was some Native American resistance to that, namely Pontiac's Rebellion. Now, this is a great example of Native resistance during this period. Pontiac's Rebellion, and essentially, what that led to directly almost was the Proclamation of 1763. And what this said is basically the colonists couldn't go further out west than the Appalachian Mountains, also known as the Proclamation Line. Proclamation Line of 1763. So these are all the kind of same thing. And now this deeply upset the colonists because, as I was talking about before, they fought in this war. And since they won, they felt that they had a right to this land that now they were being denied. Now, this ties very, very well. We have this kind of similar situation back in period 2 with Bacon's Rebellion. That was a very similar situation with natives, except Bacon's Rebellion had to do with the colonists seeking protection. So this is kind of, you can compare these two when if you're talking about like Native Americans over multiple periods, so you can compare Pontiac's rebellion and Bacon's rebellion. So now another effect of the war was that, well, now the British Empire's broke. So they needed a way to make their money back. And they passed these three acts: Sugar Act, Quartering Act, and Stamp Act. Honestly, you don't need to have these memorized, but if there is one that you should definitely know, it's the Stamp Act. Now, this one's very important because even though these two only affected certain people before, like certain groups of people, like Sugar Act affected merchants, all that kind of stuff. Stamp Act literally targets everyone because everyone's having to buy some sort of paper good or some kind of card good that they can put a stamp on and tax. So essentially, the Stamp Act affected everyone, and that's why it's so important because everyone was upset about it. So they started having boycotts, all that kind of thing. Groups against this sort of thing started being formed. If you need some examples, you got the Sons of Liberty, right? And if you need a name of a specific person, you also got Samuel Adams. So after all this protest and all that, then you get the Declaratory Act. Now this is also very important because what this says is that, okay, we'll repeal all of these other acts. So these are out the window. But from then on, the British Empire gets to do whatever they want to. So essentially, the British were just asserting their dominance with this act and giving themselves the right to pass any future legislation that they want in the future. And also, another thing that I don't have written down here is the Townshend Acts or the Townsend Acts. And that you don't really need to know anything specifically. It's just more taxes on tea, glass, paper, and a couple other things. Okay, so real quick, you should already know these two, but Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. Again, this is a review, so I'm not going to go that much into this. You should already know what this is. And these are kind of just examples for an FRQ. So just quickly reminding you, Boston Massacre, Boston Tea Party. This could show examples of colonial resistance to the British Empire. Just in case something like that were to come up on an FRQ, there you go. All right, and very quickly, legislation part 2, we got the intolerable/coercive acts. So this is important because, as you know, intolerable acts, this kind of pushed things over the edge. But basically, what I want to talk about here is kind of the philosophy behind the American Revolution. So if we remember in my last review, period 1 and 2 review, I talked about the Enlightenment. And now we're going to start seeing those Enlightenment ideas arise because of this legislation. All right, so now let's talk about the revolution. I'm not going to talk exactly about the revolution, like all the battles and stuff. I'm just going to talk about things that occurred during the revolution that would be important to know for an FRQ that you could use, that kind of thing. Now, just as a little bit of backstory, after the Intolerable Acts, right? All that stuff happened. Some British troops tried seizing military supplies, and then you get the Battle of Lexington and Concord. Revolution starts. Okay, so first up, we got the Second Continental Congress, and now this is important because this was the first. This is the first time that the thought of independence was being thrown around, like in a legal matter, I guess you could put it, because before it wasn't the majority of people didn't want independence. This is the first time that this was like, oh, this might actually happen. That whole idea, right? Now, like I said, even though it was being thrown around, a lot of people still didn't want independence. They still wanted to just fix their relationship with the king, with Britain. So they made the Olive Branch Petition. And basically, this is just a peaceful attempt to try and end the conflict, even though it was brutally turned down. So this didn't work. But this was a peaceful attempt to try and end the Revolutionary War. Didn't work. Whatever. Now you have common sense. This one is very, 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 very important. Okay. So, Common Sense, written by Thomas Paine. Basically, the people in Congress were already starting to think of independence, but the common people weren't. So, what Common Sense does is that it spread this idea of independence and why it's common sense to the American public, and basically convinced the public, yes, independence is right for the colonists. We should separate from Britain, right? And then obviously at this point we get the Declaration of Independence. Declaration of Independence, written by none other than Thomas Jefferson. So now another thing that you could bring up if you get something about natives during this period is that because Americans were attacking the British, they were also attacking natives. A lot of natives actually joined the British ranks. And now we get into the Battle of Saratoga. This, again, very, very important over here. So this is basically what allowed the Americans to win the war, because this is what got the French involved on the part of the Americans. So there had already been some negotiations going on, right? But the French weren't really sure that the Americans were capable of winning the war, and they didn't want to get involved until they were sure the Americans could win. And that was proven at the Battle of Saratoga. After that victory, the French got involved. And then later on, down the road, we get Yorktown, which is the final battle of the war. That's where it all ends. Revolutionary War is over. America is officially independent. All right, woo! America's independent now. So we need a form of government. So we have the Articles of Confederation. So the thing about the Articles of Confederation is that they didn't have kind of a judicial system or an executive branch. They didn't have any of that. They kind of just had one legislative branch, right? And as you see right here, I'm going to get into about how this was very, very, very weak, pure garbage, except for this guy right here, the Northwest Ordinance, that I'm going to get into in a little bit. But basically, other than the fact that there was only a legislative branch to the federal government and nothing else, because it was focused on the fact of states' rights. Because if you think about it, they just got freed of a tyrannical government. They don't want to make another one. So they focused it very particularly on states' rights. But let's cover some of the issues with the Articles of Confederation. No taxing power. Now, of course, if you have no taxing power, you can't fund anything. You can't have a military. You can't have any of that. You can't. The government's going to be complete garbage because they have no money to fund anything. Also, no respect. Just straight up, the European nations did not respect the new United States. And last but not least, and this one's pretty important, Shays Rebellion. So this is very, very important, because what this does is that it literally shows the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. So if you ever need an example for that, for an SAQ of some kind, Shays Rebellion is your go. Basically, it was just a farmer who was upset at high taxes, and he got a bunch of other farmers, and they rebelled, and the federal government couldn't really stop it because, as I mentioned before, no taxing power. They only had a legislative branch. They didn't have like a leader or military or anything like that. So they didn't have the power to stop it. So Shays Rebellion shows the weakness of the Articles of Confederation. Now, the Northwest Ordinance. This is very cool because this was the system that they came up with to put new states into the Union. And in fact, this is the one good thing that came out of the Articles of Confederation because it actually worked. And in fact, this system got carried into the new Constitution that we're going to get into right now. Okay, now let's talk about the new Constitution. So, the new Constitution is based on checks and balances. Of course, that's a system where not one part of the government is more powerful than the other. It's meant to create an equal government that cannot abuse its power, which is obviously based on those Enlightenment ideas from before. Now, some of the issues that they came across were the issue of representation in Congress. So that's what this great compromise has to do. So there was one side, which was the more populated states, that said, oh, representation should be based on the population. The higher the population, the more representatives they get. But then the smaller states were like, no, it should be equal. Every state should get an equal amount of representatives, so that way the big states don't crush the small states every time. And the Great Compromise said, fine, we'll have a bicameral House, or bicameral Congress, which means we'll have two houses, one that's based on population, and the other one that's equal, aka House of Representatives and the Senate. Now, 3/5 compromise, that has to do with the issue of slavery, because all the slave states they knew that now they could get an edge in the House of Representatives if they counted their slaves as a part of the population. But of course, all the non-slave states were like, no, but you don't count the slaves as people. You look at them as property, so they shouldn't be counted towards your representatives. And eventually, they came to the compromise that each slave would be counted as 3/5 of a person. Now, out of this whole debate came two sides: the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. Basically, to kind of sum it up, the Federalists were like, yeah, pro-Constitution, pro-federal government, which is what it's called, the Federalists, versus the Anti-Federalists, which were more geared towards states' rights and the rights of the people instead of a stronger federal government. And out of this, actually, came the Federalist Papers. And these were just a series of essays written to support the Constitution and get it ratified. Now, eventually, the Anti-Federalists gave in to the Constitution under one condition, that a Bill of Rights was added to the Constitution. And that, of course, is just guaranteeing basic rights for each and every citizen. So that way, the government, no matter what happens, the government is not allowed to infringe upon those rights. So now the new Constitution has been made, and Washington is made the president. So really quick, I'm just going to go over his presidency and some not so important things and some very important things. So these over here, the fact that he created the cabinet, Hamilton's financial program, all that, I would say this isn't that important. You don't need to know that for the test, like, at all. Now, it's obviously nice to know, the whole 4 years for the presidency thing, all the precedents that he set during his presidency. However, for the test, you don't need to know that. Now, what you do need to know down here is these two. Now, this is very important. The Whiskey Rebellion, first of all. So, if we remember, during the Articles of Confederation, which I talked about earlier, there was Shays' Rebellion, which showed the weakness of the Articles of Confederation because the government wasn't able to shut down the rebellion. But now we have the new Constitution, right? It's a lot more powerful. So Washington, when this whiskey rebellion comes up, which is a rebellion about some whiskey tax, right? When this whiskey rebellion comes up, Washington is able to shut it down immediately. So what this shows is the strength of the Constitution. Now, that's why the Whiskey Rebellion is important. Now, let's talk about Washington's farewell address. I can't talk today. But his farewell address. Now, the farewell address is probably the most important thing you have to take out of this entire period, if I'm being completely honest with you, because this has ideas that isolate, or I mean, isolate, that's the wrong word. This has ideas that echo throughout all of American history. And you're going to see in the later periods, this is going to be referenced. It's going to come back to this multiple times. So now his farewell address, right? Um, uh, One of the big things that he's going to say in his farewell address is to stay neutral in worldly affairs. Now, this is going to be very important once we start getting to period 7 with imperialism, all that. So this is very important that he said to remain neutral, right? And then we also have his warnings against political parties. Warnings against political parties. Now, these themes are going to be present throughout all of APUSH, which is why I'm saying that the farewell address is so important. Because one, you're probably going to get a few questions, maybe not a few, but you're definitely going to get at least one question about the farewell address on the exam, and then you're probably going to get asked questions about how, let's say, isolationism during anti-imperialists, and it's all going to tie back to the farewell address. So that's why I'm bringing this up now and why I'm saying it's so important. Political parties. Okay, now we're not done yet because we still need to talk about John Adams. Finally, let's talk about Adams' presidency. So, first of all, by this time there were two main political parties, the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans. Those are the two main parties. Adams and Washington were both Federalists, and Jefferson, which was who Adams ran against, and now he's vice president, was a Democratic Republican. So let's talk about what happened during his presidency. First things first, XYZ affair. So basically, when trying to negotiate with some French ambassadors, the French ambassadors were like, "Okay, pay up," and then there was three of them, by the way. There was three French ambassadors like, "Okay, pay up," and they were like, "No, we're not." The Americans were like, "We're not going to pay you anything. What? That's stupid." And the French were like, "Okay, no deal then." And then this got leaked to the American press. Everyone got outraged, and then they named him XYZ because it's three of them. XYZ affair. Honestly, it's something good to know, but again, I doubt you're really gonna need that for the test. Maybe on a multiple choice, but it's good to know. Alien and Sedition Acts. Now, this is important. So the Alien and Sedition Acts, basically, Adams was feeling the heat from the Democratic Republicans, and he was getting tired of getting completely destroyed in the press. So he passed the Sedition Acts, which basically meant, hey, you can't talk garbage about me. So yeah, take that, Democratic Republicans. So basically, he did that, and that's going to lead into the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions, which I'll get to in a second. But first, we're going to talk about the Alien Acts. So basically, what the Alien Acts did is that the president it basically allowed Adams to deport dangerous immigrants, right? And these are usually paired together, Alien and Sedition Acts, right? But if anything, the important one is the Sedition Act because of what we're about to talk about right now, the Kentucky and Virginia resolutions. So basically, Kentucky and Virginia saw the Sedition Acts, and they're like, hey, that's not constitutional. You can't do that. We're going to nullify that. We're going to make it so we just don't pay attention to that. So now this is going to start a kind of big issue that we're going to see develop in period 5. Well, not develop in period 5, but we're going to see it come back again, time and time again. The same question of, can the states nullify the federal government if they don't like it, if it's unconstitutional? So we're gonna see this theme pop up again in period 4, and then of course in period 5 with the Civil War. So that's why this is so important, because this basically is what posed the question. do states have the power to nullify the federal government? Have the power to nullify the federal government. So again, very important and caused by the Sedition Acts. And we're going to see this later, period 4, with the nullification crisis with South Carolina and Jackson. And once again, of course, we're going to see this once we're going to see this develop even further once we start getting into the Civil War, states start seceding, all that. But with that, I believe we are done with this video. So thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, help us grow the channel. And if you would like to continue reviewing APUSH, we have a whole playlist of all of the entirety of the APUSH course. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.